Today, I'll be going over the Fezz Audio Omega Lupi Headphone Amplifier. The unit for this review was provided to me by Audio46. Some things to know about the unit before we get into the specifics. The Fezz Audio Omega Lupi is a tube amplifier that uses 4 PCL86 tubes along with toroidal power and output transformers to achieve its amplification. The PCL86 tubes are dual filament tubes, meaning they have both triode and pentode elements contained in each capsule. The Lupi is built to power even the most hungry headphones, but I'll be getting into my experience with that in just a few minutes. The Lupi comes in a few separate components that are easy enough to put together. The main hardware unit itself, the 4 tubes, an optional protective grille, and a remote control. The Lupi relies on unbalanced connections, an RCA in, an RCA out, and an unbalanced 1/4-inch headphone out on the front. Before I get into technical performance or sound impressions, let's go over some of the look and feel of the Omega Lupi. Starting with the setup, I found it pretty easy, very straightforward. When you first open the box, it might seem a little intimidating because there are all of these separate parts and numbers on each one, but it's actually a very simple setup. The only thing that you have to do is put the tubes into their respective sockets, which is honestly a pretty satisfying activity in and of itself. And if you want, this part is totally optional. You can install the grill that I have here. This is just for safety purposes. You can also take it off and let the tubes glow in all their glory. Then moving on to just how it generally looks, I think that tube amps kind of offer this sublime enjoyment that goes beyond just how it sounds or what it's literally doing. There's just something inherently satisfying about using something analog like a tube amp. And I feel like the look of the Omega Lupi kind of capitalizes on that enjoyment. You have these, like vintage fonts going for it. Even this kind of like faceplate decal on the front has like a vintage vibe going for it. The rest of the build strikes me as fairly modern. It's simplistic, this sort of black metal look to it. So yeah, it's a mix of a modern build with vintage details, and I like that a lot. I think it is a very good looking amplifier. As far as how it handles, there are really only 2 controls on the Omega Lupi aside from the on and off switch in the back. And that would be the volume knob and also the impedance knob. For the volume knob, the only comment that I have for it is there's a pretty nice resistance on it. It's not very sensitive at all. So you can really find like the perfect listening level. You get a very exacting control when you're using the volume knob. That's kind of all I have to say on that. Then for the impedance knob, you have 3 settings: low, medium, and high. Low is for headphones that are 32 ohms and ostensibly anything below 32 ohms. Medium is between 32 ohms to 150 ohms, and then high is for anything over 150 ohms. I'll touch on my experience using those settings in a second. And then as far as the connections go, there is 1 headphone out, and that is a 6.35 millimeter or a 1/4-inch unbalanced output. And then on the back side, across from the power cord is here, and then over here we have RCA in and RCA out. And the RCA out is, I just want to note, it kind of opens up a door where if you have other amplifiers that you want to feed the Lupi into, that RCA out will serve you well. Last thing that I want to note for this part is just that there seems to be really nice temperature regulation going on with the Lupi. I currently have it on, and even when I have my hand right here on the grill, it's definitely warm, but it's not hot. It doesn't hurt me at all to have it there. And really nowhere on the Lupi, aside from the tubes themselves, obviously, does it get dangerously hot or really hot at all. Now, moving on to technical questions, there are some things that should be asked of any amplifier, tube or otherwise, or expensive or $50 or anything in between. And that is, does it get loud enough? Does it get loud enough to power my insanely high impedance headphones? And the answer, quite simply, is yes, it more than likely does. I will put the caveat on that of saying, so long as you have even just a reasonable input level going into it, the Omega Lupi can get like blaringly loud. Every headphone that I tried with the Omega Lupi, I was able to get it to a level that was far too loud for me to comfortably listen at. Also, just for a note on input levels and what I was feeding into the Omega Lupi, I intentionally used just like a very basic, simple setup. I tested it out of my Max headphone output, and then I also used my little DAC dongle combination thing, the iBasso DC06 DAC. I had both the laptop and my DAC at a fairly medium volume, and I was able to get it to very, very loud levels. Just to illustrate how loud it's capable of getting and how much power it can provide, so I test one of the headphones that I tested with it. I used a lot of different headphones, which I'll get into shortly, but when I was using the Focal Utopia, that's an 80 ohm headphone. So according to Fezz Audio, I should have the impedance knob at medium, but even when I had it at low, I got it much, much louder than I would ever reasonably listen to my music. And then actually, to take that a step further, I gave it a really power-hungry headphone. I gave it the Dan Clark Expanse, which is the headphone that you saw perched on top of it at the beginning of the video. And that's a headphone that I would intuitively think to put on a high impedance setting. But even on the low setting, granted it was at max volume, I found I was able to get it loud enough to enjoy listening to it. I would nonetheless recommend for higher impedance headphones to use the medium or high settings just so that you have more control over the volume. But I think that that is just a testament to how powerful the Omega Lupi can get even at its lowest power level. And that's kind of that. It's pretty simple. Yes, it gets very loud and it should be providing more than enough power for any headphones that you feed into it, of course, assuming that you have a reasonable input level for it. Another thing I want to note is that burn-in is absolutely, absolutely crucial for the Lupi. And that is true for most tube amps. So if you're not familiar with tube amps and you're watching this review and you're a skeptic on the headphone burn-in, I mean, fair enough, I kind of am too. It is a different story with tube amps. The burn-in process really is a very important part, and it is beyond arguing about it, the difference that it makes. So Fezz Audio recommends that you burn in for up to 40 hours. I won't lie, I didn't get it quite to 40. I got it to probably around 30 before I started reviewing it. But just out of curiosity, I tested it, when I first plugged it in with 0 burn-in, and it didn't get nearly as loud as it did when I, burned it in for a more adequate period of time. So yeah, if you end up with this, be a little patient, contain your excitement, let it burn in first. You're going to get the most out of it that way. Another note that I have on it that isn't really a complaint, just something that I noticed, there was a very, very slight noise floor in the background. This was a noise floor that was completely imperceptible once music was played. It was also something where I think I only noticed it because I thought to myself, let me listen for the noise floor. More like a lower pitched analog static. Honestly, I think some people might like it. It has a little bit of like analog charm. Pretty common to hear, some trace of a noise floor, particularly with tube amps and just more analog gear in general. So that's not really a problem I have with it. Just wanted to point it out. Now, as far as sound impressions go, I'm going to talk about the way that I heard it in a way that I don't usually talk about, I guess, sound signatures, because I wouldn't really call it a sound signature because it's not really an EQ tweak that's being made. I would describe it as changes in timbre within certain bands of EQ that I heard. Primarily, I heard this in the low mids and the lows, and I also heard it in the highs. And then kind of upon an extended listen, I was hearing a little bit in the center mids as well. But starting with the lows and maybe the low mids, because that's, I think, the most prominent timbre characteristic that I was hearing when I was listening with it. It's almost like it adds extra pixels or something of that nature to low, mid, and bass frequencies. The way I described it in my written review, for lack of a better way to put it, it's almost like a coursing sort of energy that's present in the timbre. I'll give you an example. I was listening to a song by King Gizzard called Black Hot Soup, and it opens with this really intense low, mid, and low whooshing sort of sound that when I listen to that on most headphones or most sources in general, It's just a little overpowering, and it's not really a detailed sound. It's more of just like a wall of energy. But when I was listening to that, deep whooshing sort of sound on the Omega Lupi, I was able to discern individual components of what made up that sound rather than it being presented as just like a wall of sound. It's like when you stick your head in the ocean and you hear the kind of like coursing, washing over of waves, but then also within that you hear all of these really fine details like within the water, like what's moving within the water. That's kind of how I would describe these low mids. Really like coursing is the adjective. I don't mean to get poetic here just for the sake of getting poetic, but the reason that I'm wording it like that is because, again, it really wasn't like a change in the balance. It was a change in detail and timbre. And I would say that the same characteristics that I just mentioned for the low mids and the lows is something where it didn't jump out at me immediately for the center mids, but over more extended listens, I started to hear that same sort of like beefy, but also detailed quality in electric guitars as well. I would say that for that reason, headphones that paired particularly well with the Omega Lupi was the Focal Utopia. But if you don't have $5,000 to spend on a headphone, or you don't have a $5,000 headphone, I would generalize to just say if you have a headphone that already has a kind of neutral, warm signature going for it, I think that that's what worked best with the Lupi. It just took that warmth and made it detailed. Basically, if you're giving the Lupi a warm signature to work with, I think that that's where you're going to find that sort of like detail that I'm talking about. And then on the other side of things, the high end I thought was also like a very welcome sort of timbre change. So for example, I was listening with the 109 Pro, which is a headphone that I love, and I love its treble profile, but I do admit it can get pretty peaky at times. And, as is typical for tube amps, some do it better than others. I thought that the Lupi did a really good job with this. It really tamed those lows. It added a certain limiter / compressor effect. It kind of turned the pain that can come from the 109's high end into detail. So in that regard, not only headphones with warm signatures, and the 109 Pro does have a fair amount of warmth in it despite its treble profile, but it also works very well with headphones that have a very strong and at times painful treble profile. I also tried more analytical headphones with it. I tried a bunch of Sennheiser classics with it. I tried the 800, the 600, the 660 with it. And I don't think that that is really its forte, but I don't think it sounded bad either. And a certain quality that I think it imparted to it, which is that the driver just seems to move more. There is something going on with the driver where everything that I listen to at both a medium volume and also a loud volume, it just rumbled a bit more. For example, when I was listening with the Dan Clark Expanse, that's a headphone where it's not the perfect match for the Lupi. It still sounds good. But one thing that was really cool with it was I wouldn't necessarily call that like a rumbling headphone, but there was like a more vibratory quality when I was listening with the Lupi. And that was something that I heard on even analytical signatures that, are usually a little more tame and you're doing more hearing than you are feeling. The Lupi, I think, imparts a more physical element to the listens, where there was more vibration, more rumble. So to recap those sound impressions, I would describe it as equal parts thick and detailed. It is also very smooth. I would describe the energy that it kind of imparts onto sound profiles as being like a coursing sort of like liquid energy. Did a really great job smoothing out the high end, turned painful high ends into very detailed high ends. I think it was kind of like maximizing the potential of trebly headphones as well as very warm headphones. And then, like I said, simply put, there is more than enough power going into this thing. So I think that any headphone that you plug into the Omega Lupi, you're going to get it loud enough, and you can probably get it too loud to reasonably listen with. I want to thank Audio 46 for supplying me with this unit, and I'm going to leave a link to the Audio 46 online store down below. If you want to help support the channel and you're thinking about buying the Lupi, just click the link, buy it through that link. If you want to see more reviews and videos like this, remember to like and subscribe. I do have an upcoming video on DACs that I think is going to be really good, that I think you guys will enjoy. So anyway, this is Chris with Major Hi-Fi, and I'll see you next time.